Yeah, so hello. I'm Filip Rakowski. This is my face. And I'm CTO and co-founder of vStorefront. How many of you heard about vStorefront? Please raise your hand. Wow, not bad. Not bad, but at the same time, quite bad, because it's a company from Poland. It's a startup that originates from an open source project, and well, just don't grab it. So vStorefront is a startup that originates from open source project. We started like 5 years ago, and 2 years ago we decided, okay, let's make a company and see what's gonna happen. So it was 5 of us. Right now there is 100 of us, and accidentally we created a global standard. So we have more than 1,000 stores worldwide, and basically we are beating Adobe's of this world. But I won't explain you what exactly vStorefront is, because actually what you're gonna learn during this talk is exactly what it is. So bear with me. And of course we are hiring. So I'm gonna tell you about headless commerce, why it's useful, what are the applications of that, and basically you will become an e-commerce expert after this talk, at least on a high level. So please meet Rachel, Rachel Catlover. Her face is from this person does not exist.com, so I'm not violating any GDPR and this sort of stuff. And Rachel is making amazing cat toys, really. She's making amazing cat toys, and she really wants to start selling this on the internet. But as many people, she don't know how to code, and she's not very technical. So she wants just to start selling as fast as possible without spending time on this. She has a full-time job, right? So I have a question for you. What would be the best choice for Rachel to actually start selling fast? Can anyone tell me? Just guess, just shout it. Shopify, I heard Shopify. What else? Gumroad, yes, Gumroad is also a good choice. What else? Allegro? Yeah, but Rachel is not living in Poland actually. But yeah, this is also a good choice. So I heard Shopify, and this is a perfectly valid choice. And honestly, when you want to start selling very fast, you can use Gumroad, Etsy, and Shopify. Shopify just fits my narrative, so I picked Shopify. But you know, like you can choose whatever you want. And Shopify is actually a representative of monolithic e-commerce platform. So what is a monolithic e-commerce platform? Monolithic e-commerce platform is basically a platform that is containing both front-end and back-end under one umbrella. So this is a single application that is containing everything. And if any of you is from the e-commerce space, please raise your hand. Oh, nice, nice. I have a lot of colleagues then. So if you're from the e-commerce space, you're probably hearing a lot of marketing talking about the headless commerce, about the monoliths, that monoliths are old, ugly, not maintainable, legacy, all the bad words. But the reality is they're not. Like, this is just an architecture approach, and it has pros and cons. So what are the pros of monolithic e-commerce? Probably the biggest pro of that is that it's super fast to ship it. When it comes to Shopify, you're just logging in, filling in some details, and you have your shop. Everything is out of the box, so managing orders, managing content, payments, everything is baked in. And honestly, you have only one key decision to make, which is what platform you're gonna use. So we already decided we're gonna use Shopify, and that's it. Rachel is selling. But there are also some cons of that, and I think the biggest con is full vendor lock-in. What does it mean? You're fully locked into your vendor's ecosystem. So if at some point in the future you will decide, okay, Shopify is no longer for me, then you're basically starting from scratch. And this could be a huge downside if you're a company, but if you're just a person selling things on the internet, it's probably not a big deal. Also, it's super hard to scale the development because it's just a single code base. Imagine that your shop is growing. You're having 20, 30, 40 developers, and all of them are working on a single code base. So front end, back end, everything has to go through a single pull request. And because of that, it's super easy to introduce technical debt and decrease the quality, because you could imagine that this code base will be growing. And as we know, there are no perfect code bases, and there's always technical debt, especially on growing code bases. So Rachel has a shop, so meet Rachel, CEO and co-founder of mycattoys.com. And Rachel is selling for quite some time as a side gig. And after 2 years, she's making $1,000 monthly revenue. And she sells only in UK. So I'd say it's a pretty nice business for the side gig, right? But she's also a little bit worried because she's only 1% conversion, and the market average is something like 286 or something like that, around 3%. So Rachel can make 3 times more if she would adjust into the market standards. But she has no idea how to do this. So she asks her husband for help. So meet Brian from thispersondoesn'texist.com. And Brian is a front-end developer and UI UX designer. So he has all the skills, all the capabilities to help Rachel, of course, right? And Brian is doing an audit. And he's discovering terrible things, really terrible things. First of all, the performance of Rachel's store is terrible because Rachel have no idea how things work, so she installed like 80 extensions on Shopify, even for tiny things, like a menu. Sidebar menu widget could probably take 2 megabytes because Rachel has no idea what does it mean to build a quality extension. Also, Rachel's products are very customizable, so when you're making a toy, you can really choose everything in there because she's making them on demand. And because of that, she had to do a lot of hacks. Actually, why am I like this? She had to do a lot of hacks to make things work, and the UI is super ugly. The configuration UI is super ugly. And because of that, she's also losing customers. So Brian asks Rachel to go to the kitchen to sit. He sits in front of her, and he's doing the speech. He says, Rachel, listen. Frontend is what your customers are interacting with. So it has to be fast, it has to be intuitive. Rachel, the frontend is what drives your revenue. So we need to have full control over this, how it looks, how it works, if it's fast or not. And honestly, I don't think we can do this with Shopify. And it's important to mention, Brian was using Shopify years ago, and he has slight PTSD, but it's not important for the context of this conversation. So Brian offers Rachel to fix her shop and regain the control over the front end. So what he does is he's decoupling the front end from the back end. And this is called headless e-commerce. So headless e-commerce platforms are the platforms where you no longer have just a single code base, but instead you have your backend and you have your front end, and they communicate through API. So it more or less looks like this. You have the front end, you have the backend, you have the API, they communicate, but the extensions on the backend, they don't influence the front end at all, because everything that we get there is just the data, and we also send the data. Of course, Brian doesn't want to build this thing from scratch. Brian is a seasoned developer, so he's super lazy. And it could seem easy at the first glance, of course, because it's super easy to just get the products from the API, display them. Yes, we feel powerful. We feel that, okay, it's going to take a day or two to finish the store. But in reality, it's super hard to get from there to the production-ready shop. And usually it requires a lot of optimizations. So Brian is starting to look for some boilerplates on the internet, and he discovers one that is officially supported by Shopify, and it's on React. It's called Hydrogen. He also finds the storefront. Of course, he's choosing the better option. So the current architecture looks like this. We have Shopify backend. We talk through an API to the storefront, and Brian is running the npm run dev command. He has this beautiful boilerplate that is actually a working e-commerce store. He's customizing it for Rachel, and it works. But also Brian wants to keep the performance under control, and again, he's lazy. So he doesn't want to manually check it every time. So Brian goes to the GitHub Actions store, and he's installing Lighthouse CI. Lighthouse CI is a tool that can run on any pull request. It will run a Lighthouse audit, usually in a controlled environment, which means that the score shouldn't be influenced by any external factors. So it's pretty reliable. And on every pull request, we actually see if the performance decreased, increased, And this is exactly what Brian wants to know. Of course, keep in mind that running this on a server, it's definitely not how your users will experience your website. They could have bad internet, good internet, but Lighthouse CI is mostly to see if there was an improvement or decrease in the performance. That's the only purpose of this tool. Now, Brian also wants Rachel to be able to manage the content of the store just like she did with Shopify. So in Shopify, you have a content management system. You can create the pages. You can modify everything. And right now, we decouple the front end. We are talking through API, but we want the same features on the front end. So do you know how to do this? Do you know what Brian should use to actually allow this to Rachel? Anyone? Many of you said you're doing something with e-commerce. If you don't know this, it's not good. Okay. So the answer is headless CMS. So Brian is integrating a headless CMS, in that case a story block, into the front end. A headless CMS is exactly what the name is saying. It's a CMS that is headless, which means it communicates with the front end through an API. And a lot of modern headless CMSs like Storyblock, Builder.io, they have some kind of a visual builder that is allowing non-technical people to actually build the whole pages from the components from the application and fill them with content. So Brian is preparing components in the repository, just like he's doing normally. And then in Storyblock, he's creating the same schemas for the components where the props of the component are matching the schema. Then Rachel can just go to a visual builder, drag and drop the components, and then on the front end we are receiving a JSON with an array, which is a list of the components with their props. So we are iterating through them using Storyblock component and displaying the components in the application. So this way we have fully dynamic pages driven by this JSON. And Rachel is just drag and dropping. She's not aware what magic is happening under the hood. Brian said that it will work, it works, everyone are happy. And over time, Rachel wants to promote her store. So she starts a TikTok channel with a funny cat videos, and it really becomes viral. Rachel is on the news. Everyone talks about Rachel. She's even at Opera. And during the weekends, she hangs out with Joe Biden. Really, like, Rachel's shop is on fire. She's becoming a celebrity. And it also gives Brian a little bit of headache. So the page is down. Brian quickly Googles how to set up cache on Nuxt.js. He set it up. Things are good. The investors are calling Rachel. And they are offering her to invest into her company because they see huge potential. So Rachel agrees, and she's getting a fundraise. And the investors have specific requirements for her. So first of all, they don't want Rachel's store to be just a store. They want Rachel's store to be a cat lifestyle brand, changing the world and taking their cats to the next level. Another thing is they want Rachel to scale it to other countries. So she will start selling in 70 new countries. And by the end of the next year, she's promised to make $50 million of revenue instead of $1,000, which is a pretty significant boost, you must admit. This is where composable commerce come in play. So composable commerce is basically headless commerce at scale. What does it mean? First of all, when we are talking about the scale of having a 50 million revenue, really small things start to matter. So when you have a small shop, you can really live with a lot of trade-offs because they don't have much impact. But the bigger revenue you have, the more important it is to actually optimize every part of your user journey, to optimize every part of your workflows, because even 0.01% conversion increase could give you a huge, huge revenue boost. So Brian takes Rachel to the kitchen again and tells her, Shopify has too many trade-offs, Rachel. if we are treating this business seriously, and we are treating this business seriously, I quit my job, I became a CTO in your startup. We have to choose the best solutions on the market that exactly fit our needs. So everything is optimized specifically for our needs and for our users, instead of relying on a single vendor for content. Actually, for the content we already rely on Storyblok, but orders management, product management, everything, inventory management, everything right now is done through Shopify. And of course, there's no one size fits all. It's impossible that Shopify is delivering exactly what we need on every level. So this is where composable commerce comes in play. And composable commerce is a development approach of selecting so-called best of breed commerce components and combining or composing them, hence the name, of course, into a custom application. So we have, instead of having one or two applications on the backend, we could have 20 of them. So we could have a separate application for cards, for loyalty, for discounts. Really, like, it could go really down into very granular applications, very granular vendors. And this way, we are not just living with the trade-offs. We're composing our stack from the solutions that exactly fit our needs. And this is exactly what Brian is doing. And in the middle, you see something called API orchestration layer. So what is this? Actually, when you have so many APIs out there, we have to orchestrate them somehow. Because imagine calling 20 or 30 APIs from the front end. Imagine including 20 or 30 SDKs on the front end. Every could weight like 20 kilobytes. So just on the startup, we already have one big performance bottleneck. And API orchestration layer, or API orchestration, is a process of integrating multiple applications into a single offering. And it basically boils down to having a single API that you're calling from the front end. And this API orchestration layer, is calling all the other APIs, concatenates the content, caches it, and sends to the front end. And because of that, the APIs are much faster. Because from the front end, we're just calling one API. There are no DNS lookups because everything is cached. We have only one API to consume instead of like 20, 30. So no performance bottlenecks because we ship less JavaScript. And what I think is super important for big businesses, it's extremely hard to analyze and monitor 20 different APIs. And when you have this API gateway, you can actually do this in one place. And if you're using Vue Storefront, basically creating this orchestration layer is super simple. You're just creating a file, importing the middleware package, importing the configuration, and running it, and it works. But you don't have to use Vue Storefront for that. There's dozens of different API gateways and orchestration layers. Even Netlify acquired one recently. It's called OneGraph. So if you're using Netlify, you probably saw Netlify Graph. It's pretty early, but still pretty usable. So then we have the configuration, and in the configuration, we're just listing the integration that we want to use with the keys. And from the front-end perspective, again, we're just calling one API. So there's like this middleware URL, and on / we can access different services. And then the middleware itself is calling those services. But from the front-end perspective, we don't care, really, we don't care. And this is also great because we're becoming more independent from the vendors. If in the future we would like to get rid of Storyblok or Shopify, it's much easier if we don't have a direct connection. Also, in many situations, there is also some degree of data modeling in the middle. So basically, sometimes you can adjust the format of the output of the Shopify API into something more generic. In that case, sometimes you can even detach Shopify, plug something else, and make absolutely no changes on the front end, which is pretty cool. Now, also one of the requirements for Rachel's store was that she is supposed to roll out to 17 new countries. And in that case, she has two options, basically. These are the two extremas. In reality, there is something in the middle always. But one extrema is that we are basically just having a separate applications for each locale, for each language. And what are the pros of this approach? Well, that's just a separate application, so we can do anything we want with them. The UI can be completely different. The integrations can be completely different. It can also be deployed in different locations, so we don't even need a CDN. But at the same time, maintenance is super expensive. Imagine that instead of having one application, you're having 17 applications and 17 teams maintaining them. It's very hard to keep them in sync. So the development is also slower. Imagine that you have to add a banner to 17 applications, and it's suddenly becoming a huge project. So when this approach makes sense, in general, when locales are completely different on the UI layer, and there are different integrations, because in Nuxt, I think also in Next, you can't reload the configuration. So you have to stick to the same integrations. You can just change the credentials. And honestly, like, this is rarely used. This approach is rarely used because of the cost, because of the complexity. And this is the ideal approach, the perfect approach, where we just have a single code base and we are basically deciding on the content based on the environmental variables. And you know, the biggest advantage here is that it's super cheap to maintain. It technically can even be hosted as a single application. So from the infrastructure perspective, it could be a single application, but it's much harder to actually do this, because then you have to take care of the CDN, you have to take care of the caching of the data layer to distribute it all around the world. So from the infrastructure perspective, it's a little bit harder to have it as a single application. But even if you deploy it as separate applications, you have a single code base. So you have to employ less developers, which is a huge benefit. But the problem is, each shop has to have the same integrations because we can have different configurations. So this approach is actually great when we have multiple languages and they differ only slightly. Also, you need a CDN if you decide that you want to just have a single application deployed in a single container. And when you have something like that, the code base is deployed. For example, for the UK, you have different credentials. For Poland, you have different credentials. So you're actually using a different page in a CMS. So as you can imagine, it's using the same components, but every page can be completely different because it's done in a CMS. So it's super nice and it's super easy to scale. Now, Rachel is ready for her 50 millions, and it's super cool. And right now, let's just recap what we learned, how Rachel came from a Shopify store owner to an owner of a composable commerce stack, which is very enterprising. So first of all, we learned that decoupling the front end and embracing the headless commerce allows Brian to fully control the front end UI and basically make it fast, because the Shopify extension no longer has impact on the performance. Secondly, with headless CMS, Rachel can control the content and can control the structure of the application without coding and without asking Brian for help, which is super cool for Brian. And thanks to implementing cache, the page remains stable under heavy loads, not like after the Opera interview. And using composable approach allowed Rachel and Brian actually to use best of breed technologies for each capability, instead of living with the trade-offs of Shopify, which at scale makes a huge difference. API orchestration layer improves performance and makes it easier to analyze and consume multiple APIs. And when you scale to another countries, to different countries, you should consider two options: building multiple applications for each country, or building a single application for all the countries, and multiple applications, well, only if they are super different. And another thing that we learned is that TikTok can make you rich, and really that's the truth. Like that's the absolute truth. Now, coming back to the early question, what is Vue Storefront? Vue Storefront is a set of tools for developers that actually allow you to do all of this without knowing how to do this. So thank you very much. I think we don't have time for Q&A. Or do we have time for Q&A?
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so we have time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, let me know.
Yep, now we're going to take questions.
Okay, we're coming with questions. Okay, so there's, wait, open it again, open it again. Okay, so some of the top questions were on the same topic, and I'm going to summarize. Would it work the same if the guy was making the toys and his wife was a developer?
That's a tough question, and I think it could. It could work the same, but it all depends on Rachel, actually.
Okay. Let's take the next question. What's the next? Okay, can Storefront use Shopify app extensions?
Actually, this is a super interesting topic because a lot of platforms right now is going headless, and the reality is that most of them can use app extensions, but again, also from the API. So usually you have to implement the UI layer on your own. Sometimes you also have React for Vue.js components baked in, but the reality is for most of the platforms I know that it's not there. So you have a little bit of additional work to do, but at the same time, this could also be a plus on the bigger scale, because those components that are delivered by all of those extensions are usually very poorly optimized. So we have a chance to do it right.
Okay, thanks. If you have any more questions, remember that our speakers are staying here for the day, so you can ask them questions. And just a reminder, there's these circles of chairs. You can discuss anything there. Yeah, and that's all I had to say. Sorry.
Okay, thanks so much for having me.